Good afternoon and welcome to another session where we look at the top 5 candidates for Best of Show. And joining us today is Doug Nye. Doug Nye is a huge enthusiast and a motorsport historian. Doug, which of the cars are you going to be championing for us this afternoon?
Well, for me, there's no question. It's the Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR. That's usually known as 722 from its Mille winning race number. It's an extraordinary piece, very, very significant in the history of motorsport. And it's the car that was used for probably the greatest one-day competitive drive in history, which was by Stirling Moss, navigated by Dennis Jenkinson, when they won the 1955 Mille in the car. And they covered 1,000 miles round Italy. I think the actual measurement for the road that they used is 992 miles, but they did have a spin. So, you know, they did travel a bit further. But anyway, notionally, they did 1,000 miles in 10 hours, 7 minutes and 48 seconds on public roads. Okay, the roads were closed. They didn't have to confront dust carts and milk floats coming in the opposite direction. But nonetheless, what an incredible achievement. And that particular car not only won the Mille in 1955, driven by Stirling and Desmond Tittering, John Fitch, sorry. Can I do that bit again?
And now?
Yeah, that car not only won the 1955 Mille, it also won the 1955 RAC Tourist Trophy race, another World Championship round, on the Dundrod circuit in Northern Ireland, driven by Stirling Moss and by John Fitch. And then in the final round of that year's Sports Car World Championship in the Targa Florio in Sicily, it won again, being driven by Stirling Moss and Peter Collins. That's all the same car, all that same car, 300 SLR, chassis number 0004, actually. And it's just an extraordinary record. Just that one season of racing, and the car was retired at the end of that year, and it's been preserved ever since by its original constructors and builders, Daimler-Benz Motoren Gesellschaft, and it's still with us today, bodied back into its Mille form, as it was when it carried that original number 722. Now that is just one extraordinary record, and of course it earned Mercedes-Benz the FIA Sports Car World Championship title in that same season of 1955, when, with Fangio as team leader, they carried away the Formula One World Championship of the time, which in those days was only for drivers. There wasn't a Constructors' Championship. But everybody in the motoring world and beyond knew who'd won the Constructors' Championship that year. And that was a German outfit with a 3-pointed star as its badge. And a lot of that is commemorated today by this magnificent motor car.
It is an amazing car, isn't it, Doug? I mean, what was the sort of build up to designing and launching the 300 SLR from Mercedes?
Well, Mercedes obviously had effectively dominated Grand Prix racing before the war through the 1930s until the great unpleasantness started in 1939. Mercedes, after the Second World War, had to recover from being effectively just a smoking crater in the ground. For a period, their people were actually assembling bicycles, never mind building cars. But then they rapidly began to produce production cars, road cars, and to sell them. They knew that building upon their racing heritage would be great sales promotion. They came back to racing initially in 1952 using the pre-war cars in South America, in Argentina, in the Temporada series, and using the 300 SL, the original gull-wing coupe, in endurance racing, as at Le Mans. They won Le Mans in 52. There was a new Formula One starting in 1954, and they announced that they would be designing a car to participate in it. And from the design of that car, the W196 Formula One car, they developed the sports car version, which was the 300 SLR. And it used an essentially similar multi-tubular space frame chassis and an essentially similar straight eight engine, canted over at 30 degrees to the right. But in the case of the sports car, it was a 3-litre unit as opposed to the 2.5-litre Formula One unit, driving through a 5-speed gearbox. And both the Formula One car and the sports car proved to be utterly magnificent. That they just set new standards in terms of design sophistication and manufacturing excellence. Everywhere on those cars that somebody can get in with a tool, you have a machined finish on the surface. They are extraordinary pieces of artwork. And that's another factor in making 722 just such an extraordinarily iconic piece. Even if you just viewed it as a piece of craftsmanship or a piece of sculpture, it would have enormous merit. You combine that with the guy who drove it most of the time and his co-drivers and his navigator, and you've got just a tremendous historic automobile, no question. The other important thing to remember about the car that we know as 722, which is Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR Chassis 4, that car not only won the Mille Miglia, driven by Moss, won the TT, driven by Moss, won the Targa Florio, driven by Moss and Peter Collins. It was also driven by Sterling in the Eifelrennen race at the Nürburgring. And it was also driven by him in the Swedish Grand Prix at Rabalov that year. And it was shared by Carl Kling and André Simon, the French driver, at Le Mans that year, when their teammate, Pierre Levesque, sadly was killed in the Le Mans disaster. And the Mercedes that were running 1-2 at the time, in the middle of the night, were both withdrawn. So the 300 SLRs in 1955 won every race that they finished, and they won every race that they started, apart from Le Mans, which they were dominating when withdrawn. It's not too shabby a record, is it?
No.
Phenomenal.
Doug, thank you very much for your nomination of 722 as the car for the Concours Virtual Best in Show. You've really given it a great send-off, and as you say, it is not just a remarkable historic car, but as you also said, it's a very beautiful car as well. One of the judges in the Concours described it as the Mona Lisa of cars, which for a Concours d'Elegance generally would not necessarily be considered as such. But I think just looking at it, it is a beautiful thing, as well as a car of power and real function. Thank you very much, Doug. And we'll see whether or not it rises to the top later. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.